Okay, again, thank you and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. You are here for Smart Cities for All, leveraging technology and data for more inclusive cities worldwide. I am Rachel Paul with IAAP. And just a few notes before we begin. We will be pausing for questions today. You are welcome at any time to put a question in the chat. And there is also a Q&A box that you'll find on the bottom. It should be on the bottom, and maybe at the top if you're in full screen mode, but you can leave a question in there and we will bring those questions forward during those breaks. I'm going to turn this over to Hannes to do introductions of our speakers today and get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Hannes Juhlin Lagrelius, and I'm a program officer at the World Blind Union, managing our work around inclusive and accessible urban development. I'd like to wish you good morning, afternoon, or evening. So on behalf of the World Blind Union and in collaboration with our partners for this webinar, the G3ICT, IAAP, and UCLG, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you all welcome. I will do some introductory remarks before we enter the presentations. We understand that these times, of course, following the spreading of the coronavirus are particularly uncertain, and that many of us face challenges to live in the ways we have done, where our everyday patterns are of course disrupted, and where we have to be innovative and flexible in finding ways allowing us to continue our work towards creating better societies for all. And also, of course, to stay happy in this overwhelming situation. Therefore, of course, we are especially happy that you have taken your time to attend this webinar on the Smart Cities for All subject. And we hope that you will find it useful and engaging, and can concentrate on something very different from the daily news about the corona. So on the World Blind Union side, one of the founders of the International Disability Alliance, we are a global organization representing the estimated 253 million persons who are blind and partially sighted worldwide. We have today 6 regional offices and member organizations from around 190 countries. And these webinars, the one today and the one tomorrow, are part of our work around global urban development, which started in 2019 when we launched our global initiative for accessible smart cities and sustainable urban development. We set out to raise the voices of our constituencies jointly with other disability constituencies to influence decision-making and discussions guiding urban development, to build capacities, and of course to collaborate with key partners and engage in policy development. The 2 webinars, including the one today, this week, are the 2 last activities for our work plan from last year, as we now enter a new phase of our program around urban development. With this webinar today, World Blind Union and Dimension partners, we aim to share insights around the trend of rapid urbanization, the global frameworks impacting how our cities and urban development and urban settlements are developed, and the implications for women and men and girls and boys with disabilities, as well as older persons. And we are today going to elaborate on the concept of smart cities, what they are, what accessibility challenges they have created, but also how urban digital accessibility challenges can be assessed and be counteracted. But before we go over to the presentations, I would like to request the 3 speakers to shortly introduce themselves before starting with the first presentation. So first, I would like to request Shivani to make a short introduction and present herself.
Thank you, Hannes. I'm Shivani Gupta. I am working as an accessibility consultant, and I have a consultancy called AccessAbility that has been working in promoting accessibility largely in India and also in some Asian countries in the last 20 years. And I'm really happy to be a part of this webinar today. Thank you.
And now I'd like to request Federico to shortly introduce yourself.
Can you hear me now? I think I'm muted.
We can hear you now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Federico Batista Poitier. I'm a policy officer at the United Cities and Local Governments, which is the largest organization of local and regional governments in the world, which is focused on localization of the global agenda and achieves our mission by really amplifying the voice of local and regional governments in global processes and at the global agenda. And I'm looking forward to the webinar, and I hope you guys enjoy as well.
Thank you, Federico. And James, would you like to also introduce yourself?
Good day, everyone. I'm James Thurston. I'm Vice President for Global Strategy and Development for an international nonprofit organization called G3ICT, or the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICTs. We were created about 14 years ago with support of the United Nations, specifically to help countries around the world implement the technology aspects of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and really focus on the digital inclusion of people with disabilities and the broad development and deployment of accessible technology. And we do that in a variety of ways. We have a global smart cities for all initiative, which I'll talk about a little later this morning. Here, I'm actually here in Washington, DC. We hold an annual conference called Enabling in Washington with about 700 attendees from around the world that focuses on technology and inclusion. We also hold that conference in other countries. We run the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and they'll be a part of the webinar that the World Blind Union is hosting tomorrow. So I encourage you to check that one out. And we work directly with countries, with governments, with industry, with civil society organizations on policies and programs to really make the technology aspects of the UN Convention real and really promote the digital inclusion of people with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, James. And now we'll proceed over to the next presentation, the first one outlined by Shivani. So over to you, Shivani.
Thanks, Hannes. Hannes, would I request you to change the slides for me?
Absolutely, we'll do that.
Yeah, okay. So the first presentation is really about the CRPD and setting the stage for the whole discussion. And Hannes, if you can change, go to the third, change the slide.
Yeah, I did.
No, change more.
Oh, okay. This one?
No, maybe I can share my
It's
screen.
not moving.
It's not changing.
It's not moving. Okay.
On ours, what we're seeing, it's stuck.
Maybe
Okay.
I can share my screen then, if you can unshare yours.
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thanks.
I do apologize for that. I don't know why it was freezing.
Oh, I think this is going to take longer than because I think it's a poor net connection that I have because of this coronavirus. So I think I'm just going to speak without the presentation, which is quite okay. And I saw the list of the participants and I see a lot of familiar names, and I know that the convention is very familiar to all of us. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is a landmark international treaty that was adopted in 2006. It is both a comprehensive human rights convention and an international development tool, and at the heart of it is the disability rights movement. The convention brings a paradigm shift from the way persons with disabilities are viewed as objects of charity requiring medical treatment and protection to being seen as subjects of rights who are capable of claiming those rights and making decisions for their own lives, as well as being active members of the society. The convention does not create any new rights, but clarifies the application of the existing human rights provisions in the context of disability. So as a result of the paradigm shift that the CRPD brings, there is a radical change in the way disability is conceptualized, and that influences the way policies are being shaped worldwide. And if we were to see, like the CRPD was adopted in 2006, and all the international humanitarian and development documents that came after that, which is including the Agenda 2030, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and the New Urban Agenda, are all based on the principles, and they adopt the standards of human rights for persons with disabilities prescribed in the convention. Now I'd just like to talk a little about what does it mean to align with the CRPD. So we all know accessibility is a precondition for persons with disabilities to live independently and participate fully and equally in society. Without access to physical environment, transportation, information and communication, including information and communication technologies and systems, persons with disabilities would not have equal opportunities to participate in their society. Thus, considering the significance of accessibility, it is one of the general principles of the convention that makes it applicable to all the articles of the convention. In addition, there are specific articles addressing accessibility, which are Article 9 and Article 21. And additionally, Article 19 on living independently and being included in the community emphasizes on the requirement for home accessibility and accessibility of public services and facilities. And while reading any of these articles, reference to the general comment by the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on Article 9 is important. Now, since accessibility is one of the key underlying general principles of the convention, making it vital for effective and equal enjoyment of all rights of persons with disabilities. Accessibility should be viewed not only in the context of equality and non-discrimination, but also as a way of investing in society and as an integral part of sustainable development goals. Now, having said that, it is important to state that research indicates that the additional cost to a project for providing accessibility is only about 2% of the total cost if planned and incorporated right in the beginning. However, if not provided in the beginning, cost of retrofitting can be very high. Therefore, as is also emphasized in the convention, approaching accessibility from the perspective of universal design is a win-win for all, including policymakers, implementers, designers, users, and all. So ensuring universal design is the only way to ensure that all public money for humanitarian and development purposes that we already know is never really enough, leaves no one behind. So with that thought, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you, Hannes.
Thank you so much for that, Shivani. And we will now swiftly go over to Federico's presentation.
Should I share
kindly
from
share
my
your screen as well?
Yeah. 1 second. Let me just, here we go. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can, Federico.
Yes.
Perfect, great. All right, so thank you, Shivani, for your presentation and really going into the this CRPD. I'm going to talk about the frameworks of our organization, the United Cities and Local Governments, and the main international commitments to urban development from these two frameworks, which we're focused on localizing the Sustainable Development Goals and also the New Urban Agenda. In our constituency, really local and regional governments are so close to the citizens that it's important that these agendas really come from a local perspective, because that's at the heart of where these agendas are happening. So the Sustainable Development Goals, I'll just go briefly over. We have 17 goals and particular focus on urbanization within SDG 11, which is on sustainable cities and communities. The interesting thing, though, is the SDGs, although they have specific goals, a lot of them are cross-cutting, and SDG 11 is one of these key goals that is important to achieving other goals such as SDG 1 on no poverty, or SDG 4 on health, SDG 3 on education. And this is the importance of having the urban look at the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we look at data, which I like data because we have some numbers, we have a projection by 2050 that 68% of the global population will be living in urban areas. And going further from that, and really speaking to the reason that local and regional governments need to be engaged into these discussions and the policy processes, is that the majority, close to, well, I have 65%, I would even say 70, but 65% of the targets and indicators within the Sustainable Development Goals cannot be achieved without coordination with local and regional governments. So it's really key, looking at the rapid changes in urbanization and also to achieve this ambitious 2030 agenda and have more equity in more sustainability and development, the importance of having an urban dimension to the goals. And I also wanted to highlight that at the HLPF, which is the High Level Political Forum that does the assessment of the Sustainable Development Goals, there has been an introduction of also a voluntary local report. So initially the UN was looking at voluntary national reports, but in 2018, New York was the first city to submit a voluntary local report, and cities are now more and more engaged in this voluntary local reporting. And we host a local and regional government forum at the High Level Political Forum each year. So we're more getting into this, these changes in looking at the transformation from the changes in urbanization and the need to have a more broader look at the multilateral system. So the document that I really wanted to go into is the New Urban Agenda, which my colleague Shivani mentioned a little bit earlier. And this was one of the primary outcomes of the Habitat 3 process, which was in 2016 in Quito, Ecuador. The Habitat process happens every 20 years, and the first was in 1976. And really was focused on human settlements. And the Habitat 3 went further to looking at housing and sustainable urban development as the key issues that needed to be addressed. So before going on, I wanted to just throw out some more data because I love data. So why a priority on urbanization? So when we think about it, cities in terms of land occupy approximately only 2 to 3% of the land. But if we look more into the numbers of our global economy, of our global waste, of the emissions that we're putting out into our beautiful planet, cities account for a lot of the consumption, the economy, and waste. So there's always been a key discussion around the battle for sustainable development and where that will be won or lost is in cities. And we can even go further at looking at equity and human rights. And these are more and more becoming important topics for cities to tackle and address, because also the battle for human rights, the battles for implementing and localizing the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities will be won or lost in cities. So that looking at the way that urbanization is going around the whole planet, it's a trend that you see in every region and every place. The New Urban Agenda has this idea of having a shared vision of how we want that urban transformation to be, and how we can achieve more sustainability in cities. And it looks at instead taking well-planned, looking at urban planning that is effective, having really inclusive national urban policies, ways of urban governments that are participatory, and financing models that can ensure that local and regional governments are able to address inequalities in cities. And that was one of the key aspects of the New Urban Agenda, and really providing this more transformative way of how we see urban planning, and which kind of stakeholders need to be addressed and need to be part of the transformation. The document includes also particular mentions to smart city and to the right to the city models. And these are both also really transformations in how we develop cities. And with my colleague James will go in, of course, more deeply, but the way that we see smart cities and the digital transformation of how we access services really needs to have a lens of equity and inclusion, so that we don't leave anybody behind. And also, what is our right to the city? If cities are now taking up the 70% of the global economy and the opportunities, what rights do people have in cities, and how do we exercise our rights, like accessibility, to ensure that we have effective urban planning? The New Urban Agenda tackles different groups, and within the process of the Habitat 3, really brought in the stakeholders into the discussions. And throughout the growth of the New Urban Agenda, the outcome document, the agenda went from having one mention of persons with disabilities to having 15 specific mentions and commitments to disability inclusion within the document. And this is quite important, because if we're looking at urbanization being a key factor and where we have sustainability in cities, we have to ensure that the people are not left behind. And by having commitments that recognize the way that each particular group, whether it's by gender, age, or disability, experiences urbanization, is important to having more effective models, and ensuring that these effective financing frameworks also include dimensions that are going to facilitate inclusion, such as accessibility. And these 15 specific mentions, particularly around urbanization, include non-discrimination, the look at adequate housing and standard of living, which if we look at the advancements now with the COVID, is such a key aspect. You know, having housing is actually in the end that keeps us resilient. But we have many people around the world that don't have access to adequate housing and a standard of living that would keep them safe. The document also goes into addressing access to physical infrastructure and accessibility, particularly in cities and human settlements. A big key aspect is thinking about how do we guarantee that we have equitable participation in decision making. So how are people able to participate in the urban governance and also have that equity model in political participation? The meaningful engagement between local government and civil society, which is really key in terms of for our network, because we are so close to the citizens, and we are the voice at times for citizens at the global level. And so that engagement model is really important to also achieving the SDGs. Having decent and productive employment, mobility and safety in public spaces, which is such a key factor in the way that we also have access to employment, how we also are able to participate in decision-making processes. Having the empowerment and capacity to engage and disaggregated data for equitable urban planning and development. Now, I know you probably think that I skipped the bullet point, but I just wanted to say, because we're also mentioning the smart city aspect, a key notion was the need for accessible information and communications technologies. And the information gap is, and the access to the information gap is still a huge challenge in different areas, whether it's employment, whether it's political participation, or whether emergency response. And so a key aspect on whether we're going to achieve the sustainability of this new urban agenda depends on how accessible our information is, and also, now that we're talking about smart cities, is that those ICTs and those smart city strategies, are they going to be accessible? I just have here a JPEG. Since I'm not so savvy, I just took a screenshot. But this new urban agenda document is also available from the Habitat 3 website, habitat3.org, in audio format in the 6 official languages of the UN. And if you happen to be in Nairobi or New York, it is available in hard copy Braille as well. You know, speaking really from how we were talking about the new urban agenda as a key way to looking at how urbanization is going to really change the world that we live in, and the need for local and regional governments to be communicating with the citizens. Our network launched a policy co-creation with civil society members in 5 specific areas, which where a policy document was created and presented and debated at our local and our World Assembly of Local and Regional Governments that happened last November, and which these documents were also approved by the World Assembly of Local and Regional Governments. So was a very close creation with civil society that not only was a declaration, but really what are the key things that cities need to look at. And I have a photo here of the different constituents that were part of the process with our hashtag for the assembly or the summit, that was the cities are listening. And we really are listening, and we want to follow those recommendations and really achieve them. And so one of out of the 5 areas, one of them were specifically on inclusive and accessible cities, which was developed in close coordination with the DIU network and also the other cities that are involved in the Global Compact. So I just want to make sure that I'm still on okay with time to see a chat here. Ah, that's still good. Oh, is the PowerPoint moving now? I saw that. Ah, well, I think it's okay. So the other aspects were also gender equality, sustainable urban development, addressing informalities, and the right to the city. And interestingly, in the process, the co-creation also inspired the other groups to look at how the areas could complement. So how does inclusive and accessible cities look at addressing informalities and also aspects of the right to the city. So it really led us into more of our priorities for inclusion and accessibility and the reason why local and regional governments need to be involved in these processes. And the policy paper really went into defining what we meant by an inclusive and accessible city. And the big thing to really think about is the importance of breaking down these barriers and having inclusive urban development policies, investments, and programs so that we can have stronger, more socio-economic opportunities for all individuals, which is a marker of resilience for cities and important in addressing the inequalities that are still present and exacerbated in cities. And I have a photo here of the policy paper, which identified a way forward for local and regional governments. There's a lot of words on this slide, but we can easily just kind of summarize some of those points. But it really is about activating local communities with local and regional governments, having a system-wide assessment of the municipal policies, programs, and services that are able to support inclusion and accessibility that are mentioned pillars of the document, adopting an explicit mention to inclusion and accessibility so that there's a common understanding around universal design, which is really important because accessibility does have standards and does have clear markers, but sometimes it's not understood commonly. So really that local and regional governments could promote as a network a clean definition that's structured. And then using the assessments of the local policies and capacities to establish a roadmap. A key thing I always will say is maintaining accessible platforms to communicate planning information. So ensuring that any printed material or websites have accessible and user-friendly formats. And then a way for the communities to act, the community of local and regional governments to engage with other organizations such as organizations of persons with disabilities and older persons to be involved in the transformation. And also at the local level to generate local and disaggregated data on inclusion and auditing accessibility in cities and sharing that information with the community. So a part of those recommendations has led us to our commitment to really building that capacity. And on the left, there's a photo of 4 people. One of them is a good friend of mine, and which is the Deputy Secretary of Persons with Disabilities in Sao Paulo, presenting at the local and regional government summit in November, and debating this policy paper, which was approved. And we're working now strategically within UCLG and within our network on the establishment of a community of practice on accessible cities. That is going to be a space to foster peer learning on universal design, but not only the peer learning, build the capacity for other cities to also adopt inclusive policies and implement those programs. So the last slide that I have is our policy priorities are also available in accessible formats. So we have it in text in English, Spanish, and French, audio formats in all 3 languages, and an easy to read format in English, which on the left I have a photo of the easy to read format. So any further questions, I've left my email below, but also we have time for questions, I think, if I'm correct now, and also towards the end. So just leave it open there. Thank you.
Thank you, Federico. This is James, and yes, we do have time built into the agenda now for questions about any of the remarks or points so far.
I do not see any questions at the moment. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything in the chat. I do not see any questions at this time. So I guess, James, if you would like to continue, we'll go ahead. And just as a reminder, you can leave your questions in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll go on then. Thank you.
Thank you. So Hannes is here. Yeah, I, by mistake, unmuted myself, but I'd like to take this opportunity to ask a question following Federico's presentation. I was wondering, Federico, you very nicely outlined the work behind the UCLG policy paper on inclusive and accessible cities. So my question to you would be, now when UCLG have adopted the policy papers, how would you envision the way forward for UCLG, and what can actually this adoption of the policy paper mean for organizations of persons with disabilities, also when they collaborate or aim to collaborate with their local authorities?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's something that now with a good framework from the policy paper we can address. I think what it means for us is that we need to have a common voice. If we're also having a common voice on other policies, we need to have a very common voice and narrative around what we're talking about in these dimensions of inclusion and accessibility. And not only the common narrative, but also when we're looking at the policy paper and the structure behind, also including those communities, and where we see the strong point of having the connection between the civil society is that transformation in that capacity building for local and regional governments to address this won't happen without being able to coordinate with local organizations of persons with disabilities and older persons on the ground. So whether that's in terms of being involved in the urban governance, or being involved in types of trainings that the municipalities will need to be more inclusive, there is very tangible aspects that we as local and regional governments are ready to explore. That includes, really building up the strength that we have to address these recommendations, but also making sure that we are able to engage effectively with the civil society. So the solutions are very collaborative in the sense, we're open to the recommendations, but we know that they can be achieved only from the lens of local and regional governments. And the power that we have as a constituency is the proximity that we have to the citizens, and we want to make sure that that is the most inclusive that it can be, and open to engaging in a very structured and productive dialogue.
Thank you so much, Federico.
Federico, this is James. I also have a question for you, if I could.
Yes.
And it's actually two questions. Sort of following on Hannes's question about the role of civil society, from the UCLG perspective, can you maybe talk a little bit about the role of industry in the private sector in making progress on these commitments? And then also, I'm curious to know, having worked with you with cities around the world, do you see certain regions or countries where there's an interest and commitment to, maybe a stronger interest and commitment to making progress on these issues of inclusion and accessibility in cities?
Yeah, so on the first part, I think, as a constituency, we're always open to working with industry, but of course, due to different things, right? It's very much how to be responsibly working with industry to ensure that there aren't privatization of services. But In terms of the industry's role, we do see that can be a very effective model. And I mean, just from working with you, I'm also quite advocate of these very responsible industry. And I think we see more and more of the private sector also like embedding, you know, a type of human rights council and perspective into their work stream and making sure that it's very responsible. And so we're very open, and we're trying to also ensure that our constituency has the capacity to also understand their engagements with the private sector. So there is a strong will there, and especially when that does come with really tangible tools. In terms of where I see the openings, I mean, the interesting thing is that I would say that a lot of the regions are open to it, and they are the dialogue is there. You know, if we look at Latin America, they're really opening up a space for how the new urban agenda would look like in the dimension of inclusion. And you have networks like Mercociudades, which does work on disability as part of their one of their work streams. The big question is, and of course, like other cities like Barcelona and New York, and you have cities like Fukuoka that are looking at aspects on accessibility that are not only on the physical infrastructure, but also like how the feeling in terms of, you know, for people with cognitive impairments, how that dimension of colors can lead to accessibility. So there's a lot of cities that are either interested or already, you know, having the capacity to engage. But I think the biggest thing from going from just interest is, you know, having clear tools available, because the will is there, but it's more, what are the tools that I can integrate if I have a policy, or if you're suggesting a policy, what are the tools that I can already implement to address participatory political processes. And those tools are there, but the aspect is not knowing where they are, the cities not knowing where they are, and also trying to build that more peer-to-peer understanding to see which cities are doing it in different contexts, right? So if you have a city like New York, or if you have a city like Banjarmasin in Indonesia, which are both doing great work on inclusion, but different ways because they have different capacities, how is that really useful to see, okay, well, you have a city with, you know, a huge city with a stronger budget, and you have a smaller city with other challenges around sustainability because of the rivers. How can having these different dimensions then provide more of that capacity and strength building, and also the feeling that a smaller or medium-sized city could also achieve the same as a New York or São Paulo?
Great, thank you.
We did have one question come in. If I could ask, let's see, from Mark is asking, I'm relatively new to accessibility outside of document remediation, so this may or may not be relevant. Atlanta has quite a few live walk, play, urban developments popping up around the city. While being interesting and compact, they seem to be somewhat standardized. I'm curious to know how accessible that format has been in general, since it's often viewed as a new and modern model.
So, and this kind of live walk play, I'm assuming you mean this in terms of where the different members of society are able to kind of go through a walkthrough as in a different mobility form. I mean, there's good and positives behind it. I think that you know, it depends on how you look at it. There's an awareness aspect that can be quite important, but I think the most effective model is more bridging the communication gap that isn't there. And I think those walkthroughs can be more effective if it's maybe walking in your mobility form, but getting to know somebody in another mobility that you don't engage with normally, and seeing that portion and just taking a walk through the city in that aspect, and promoting also that change of perceptions, which I think is really important in also addressing inclusive policies. Is, you know, what are the attitudes and beliefs that we have, you know, around the different modes in society. And you know, if you look at something like mobility, it's something that's not understood behind all the diversity that we have around mobility in the society. So yeah, that's what I wanted.
Federico, this is Sam. I think what Mark was referring to is live, walk, play, mixed use developments where they're business, home, and parks all together in
okay,
a
sorry.
new building, office, and home environments.
Okay. I mean, I wouldn't say there's a very clear understanding there. I think that the mixed mode definitely speaks more in terms of density, which I think that is really important. And depending on what kind of, depends on the context actually of the city. But I think speaking in more of those mixed modes in terms of the density of the services that are around is quite an effective way to around accessibility as well, because density not only is good in combating the urban sprawl, but also brings services closer to the people. So they're not either traveling far for different services, whether it be parks or employment, and those things are closer, but also that in the end, those services are much more accessible.
Okay. Thank you, Hannes. I believe that was the last question. So I guess we will go ahead and move on. Thank you.
Should I stop sharing my screen, or James, do you want me to help you out?
Sure. No, I can. I'll share my screen now. Thank you so much, Federico. Are you able to see my screen?
I can.
Yes.
Okay, great. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you to Hannes for inviting G3ICT to be a part of this webinar series. We're excited to play a role in it. And thank you, Shivani and Federico, for your remarks, which I think are really important discussions about why cities matter and what are the linkages to key international commitments that are out there that we're all working to really advance. And now what I'd like to do is start to focus on smart cities more specifically and the role of inclusion and accessibility in smart cities around the world, and what it means to be both smarter and more inclusive. And just by way of brief introduction, I had talked about G3ICT, the nonprofit organization that I work for. But about 4 years ago, G3ICT reached out to some key partners in civil society, organizations like World Enabled and in industry as well, big technology companies like Microsoft and AT&T. And we reached out to them to really create a new global initiative to define what it means for a city to be both smarter and more inclusive at the same time. And we really see those as mutually reinforcing objectives, that you don't have to give up one to get the other, that they really do. If a city focuses on both, being smarter and more inclusive, the benefits to city employees and to the people in the communities of the city will be that much larger. So on this slide, I'm showing the logo for G3ICT's Smart Cities for All Toolkit. After some introduction to some key concepts and trends that we're seeing that sort of underlie why we focus on inclusion in smart cities, I want to talk about some of these tools and strategies for really supporting more inclusive smart cities, actual steps that cities can take today and that they are taking today to be both smarter and more inclusive. So I think it's important to start with perhaps a definition of what do we mean by smart city. And when we started this work, we realized there's lots of definitions of what a smart city is. I think I used to joke that there's as many definitions of what a smart city is as there are cities in the world. But we settled in on one definition that we actually like for a variety of reasons. And the definition that we use when we're talking about a smart city it comes from the Smart Cities Council, an organization that does a lot of really great work on smart cities. And the definition is that a smart city is a city that uses information and communication technologies, or ICTs, to enhance the livability, workability, and sustainability of the city and its people and communities. And I really like this definition because for a few reasons. One, it's short and easy to understand, but it also gets beyond just efficiency and cost savings, which are important and really a real reason why cities invest in technology. But it focuses on technology and livability as well, the more human aspect of investing in and deploying technology and using data. So for that reason, I think we tend to point to this definition of what a smart city is. And by this definition, I think we see smart cities in every region of the world. Beyond this definition, as we do our work with cities and with our partner ecosystem around the world, I think to an extent, we really let cities just self-define themselves as being. In our cities, in the tools that I'll talk about and the strategies that I'll talk about, we really focus more on cities that are deploying technology and using data. And that can be more mainstream technologies like websites and mobile apps, or it can be more leading edge smart solutions like sensors and IoT solutions, Internet of Things solutions. But these concepts of the use of technology and the use of data are really two core concepts that undergird what a smart city is. And I'll be talking a little bit about that in the relationship to accessibility and inclusion as part of using data and deploying technology. But I think importantly, by any definition, just about every city in the world today is using technology, deploying technology, and using data to some extent. And that is really a core principle of our work in recognizing that they are. So when we launched the Smart Cities for All initiative about 4 years ago, we were seeing some global trends and demographic information that on its own, each of these data points weren't necessarily concerning, but taken together, they were painting a picture and really presenting a reality that was concerning. And I want to just talk through a few of those very important trends and realities that are out there today that make this work that we're all doing on cities and smart cities in inclusion and accessibility really important, I think. First of all, as you've heard today, cities are our future. Most of the population lives in the city today, and that will continue to increase in the coming years. I think we've all seen this data point of 50%, or Federico, I think you may have had a different data point of 68%, but a larger number within the coming decades of people living in cities. One of the most interesting data points that I've heard, or a couple of them actually, that related to this urbanization of our world today, is that in China, for example, the movement to live in cities is so great that in China, they would have to build a new city of 1 million people every week to keep up with that demand to move into cities, to live in an urban environment, which is just stunning. And we see that similar dynamic in cities around the world. In Africa, and you can look at this urbanization trend by regions, and in Africa, the urbanization trend is so intense that 10 of the fastest growing cities in the world are in Africa today. And so these issues become really even more important in some of these regions. Another trend that we look at, and really is the basis for much of the work that G3ICT does around the world, is the digital transformation of our world. Technology is increasingly pervasive in our lives. We're using technology, many of us, from the moment we wake up until the moment we go to sleep, and even while we're sleeping, our technology is working for us and with us. And that's the reality of today, which is, I come from the technology industry originally, and these developments, this digital transformation is incredibly exciting to me, but to our organization, G3ICT, but we also recognize that it has enormous impacts on people with disabilities, older persons, and the need for accessibility as part of that digital transformation. But just a few data points about this enormous shift to the use of technology. Today, there's more than 8 billion mobile subscriptions in the world. That's more than people in the world. We have truly raised a generation of digital natives. 70% of youth today are online and very comfortable using technology. We are an incredibly connected world. There's about 50 billion devices connected to the internet or Internet of Things. And these are not just your mobile phone and your computer. It's your car, it's your refrigerator, your microwave oven, your watch. We're connected in an enormous array of ways that really provides great opportunity and benefits to people. We're also increasingly using technology in some really important sectors like transportation. One of the data points that I have here on this slide is that the estimate for, in the first year of use for autonomous taxis, the estimate is that autonomous taxis will be used for, in the US alone, this is a US estimate, 108 billion miles of use. So that's the demand for these kinds of smart solutions and deployment of technology. More immediately, that's sort of down the road, the use of autonomous vehicles and taxis. But more immediately in the transportation sector, and I think an indicator of just how smart solutions and technology are moving into society. Today, I was actually in a meeting with a transportation planning and mobility as a service company called Move It, which you may be familiar with. They have a transportation planning solution that's used around the world. The pervasiveness of using technology, in this case in the transportation sector, is enormous. And just with that one company alone, they have more than 500 million users around the world that are using their solution every day, and they're supporting 5 billion trips every day with their transportation app. And the data that it's creating is incredibly rich and useful, and I'll talk a little bit about that kind of data and what it means for, or can mean, for inclusion in cities in a bit. We also know that with this urbanization and with this digital transformation, smart cities are really the leading edge, defining what it means to be using technology in our day-to-day lives. And I say that in part because we know that smart cities and smart city technologies are big business. The market for smart city technologies will reach about $2.5 trillion US dollars by the year 2025, so within a few years. We also know that just about every technology company has a smart city business unit. They're focused on that market of technology in cities in a laser-like way. There's a lot of smaller companies and startups and entrepreneurs that are creating new and exciting smart city solutions, technology solutions for cities every day. And these smart cities are really redefining how we as human beings interact with each other and with our governments and our communities. So they're incredibly important, sort of window to where we're headed in the future, potentially. Another important demographic data point that informed our creation of the Smart Cities for All global initiative is something that we've discussed already a little bit in the webinar today, is that people with disabilities are part of our communities globally and within cities. I think most of us on this webinar probably know that people with disabilities make up about 15% of the population, or about 1 billion people worldwide, which is an important data point. And like Federico, we also like, and I also like using data. But I think related to that are some of these other key important socioeconomic metrics that we need to be looking at as we're working with cities and how they're using technology. And these are some of the outcome metrics that we're familiar with, that people with disabilities typically have lower levels of educational attainment, higher levels of unemployment, higher levels of poverty. Some of the contributors to poverty are those metrics and outcomes are also problematic for people with disabilities, like access to financial services. Here in the US, and I think in most countries, people with disabilities are the largest unbanked minority in the country. So there's, as we think about these numbers and these data points, I always like to also make sure that we're focused on these outcomes, because the work that we're doing on inclusive smart cities is really driving towards improving these outcomes around the world. Another data point that I often like to bring up, especially when I'm working with technology companies and with industry in the private sector, is that people with disabilities are a key global market. They're a business opportunity. The disposable income of people with disabilities in their immediate families is more than $8 trillion US. So it's smart companies, leading companies get that and are focused on creating products and services and smart solutions and technologies that really do work for everyone. But we know that today, technology is not accessible enough. Every year, G3ICT does a global survey and analysis called the DARE Index, D-A-R-E, DARE Index. And this information is all on our website. And that analysis looks at how signatories to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, how they're making progress on the technology and accessibility aspects of the convention. It's a really incredibly unique data set that provides some really interesting and valuable insights to how our country is progressing on becoming more accessible. And the most recent year's data I think that we have is 2018. That's on our website as well. And just a few data points to show from that DARE Index to show that we have a lot of work to do when it comes to accessible technology. For example, from the DARE Index, we know that 55% of countries, more than half of countries around the world, and these are countries that have signed the UN Convention. I think the most recent analysis, we have more than 120 or 125 countries as part of that survey and analysis. More than half of them, 55%, do not have accessible policies for accessible websites. One example that a city gave me that's sort of related to this, and if you think about accessibility in websites in particular, and just the level of information flow that governments are providing, including cities, through websites and mobile apps. A commissioner of a large city here in the US, one of the largest, was talking to me recently about a person with a disability who was wanting to apply for housing support, but the only way at the time that in that large city that you could apply for housing support, so funding to help you pay your rent, was online. But it wasn't necessarily clear that the website, the e-government website was itself accessible. So these e-government services and the use of websites are critically important to the kinds of services that cities are providing. And I think if we think about information flow, particularly today, where we're all likely sheltering in place and desperate for information about how the pandemic is playing out in our communities and around the world, that information flow is critically important. And so accessible websites, accessible mobile apps, and information that's delivered through them become incredibly important. In a similar way, 67% of countries do not have policies that require that they only buy accessible technology. They do not have procurement policies. In a minute, when I get to the toolkit that we've created for cities, I'll talk about why these procurement policies are so important. But it's basically a requirement of the government on itself that when they buy technology, they will only buy accessible technology. And the reason that that's important is because cities and government in general are among the biggest consumers of technology. So if a city says, we will no longer buy your technology product or your smart solution unless it's accessible, it has a huge impact on the market. It really drives it to be more focused on accessibility and really more innovative around accessibility as well. So what do we mean by accessible technology? And just briefly, I'll touch on some of this. It's technology that's usable by everyone. And really any technology today can be designed to be accessible or more accessible for people with disabilities. So for example, people with visual disabilities, there are built-in screen magnifiers, speech recognition, text-to-speech, alternative text. For people with hearing disabilities, there's haptic response and vibration, captioning of video content. For people with cognitive disabilities, there's the ability to remove distractions and manage it, things like animation and to manage how long dialogue boxes stay open that make it easier to process information and use solutions. For people with mobility disabilities, there are keyboard adjustments to simplify typing, voice commands. And so there's a lot of ways to design technology that really does work for everyone, including people with disabilities. Another way that we look at accessible technology is clearly that it's a human right as defined by the CRPD. Importantly, I think for our conversations and our work with cities is that accessible technology is defined by standards. At this point, we're fortunate that there are today some global standards that really do, in a very robust way, define what it means for every kind of technology to be accessible for every kind of disability. And we encourage and work with cities and other governments to use those standards in effective ways. And I'll talk about that when I get to the toolkit. Accessible technology is also part of an ecosystem. So there's ways to make hardware and software and even technology services accessible, but all of those need to interoperate and work together with each other and also with assistive technologies. I like to often say that accessible technology is leading edge. It is a former boss of mine at a technology company used to say that the accessible technology of today becomes the mainstream technology of tomorrow. It's really innovative, which is part of this sort of excitement of getting developers and innovators thinking about accessibility. The example that I often give is that speech recognition, which was a feature built as an accessibility feature, is very mainstream today. In fact, for me personally, I only use speech recognition on my mobile phone. And ultimately, accessible technology benefits everyone. So if we think about accessible technology in smart cities, in cities that are using and deploying technology, what does it mean? How does that matter? And it becomes, I think, pretty immediately clear that in the broad range of services that cities offer, from education to courts and justice systems to public safety, emergency preparedness, transportation, public works, and utilities, cities provide to their communities a broad range of services that are critically important to our day-to-day life. And for all of them, accessibility becomes fundamental to people with disabilities using those often very critical services. So as we think of some specifics, I think let's think about some of the ways that cities are using technology today, and maybe start with what is probably front of mind for all of us around the world, which is emergency preparedness and response. As cities around the world are responding to the coronavirus, what we're seeing is that, and as people are sheltering in place more and more, cities and governments are digitizing even more of their services and information. And technology is playing an even larger role in communicating critical and sometimes life-saving information to communities in cities. From tracking cases to maintaining normal levels of government services. For example, I live in Washington, D.C., the city of Washington. I check my city's COVID website regularly for updates. I get regular emergency alerts through my phone. But is this information being delivered in a way that's accessible for everyone? This is very critical information. Or sometimes the very technical information presented in a way that may not be understandable by someone with a cognitive or intellectual disability, or that's not readable by a screen reader, for example, or videos that are not captioned. A colleague from a major technology company told me yesterday that in Italy, which has become a focus in this pandemic at this point, all of the 80,000 judges in Italy have started using collaboration software to do their justice work because everyone's working remotely. It's an enormous, on the one hand, it's amazing in that the technology is supporting the ongoing critical work in the justice system, but is it accessible? My understanding is that this particular software solution is actually accessible, but you can see the role of technology in emergency preparedness and response. Similar to that, transportation and mobility is one of the areas where we often see the deployment of technology first in cities. So things like planning and executing trips across multiple modes of transportation, from bus to subway to scooter to a bike to Uber. Cities are using technology to support the planning and execution of those trips. But if you look at those, and again, from the technology perspective, they're exciting, but are they accessible? Can all the graphical information, the very rich graphical information like maps and schedules, can they be read by a screen reader? Is there alternative text for transportation planning for people with visual disabilities? Likewise, a lot of governments, including in cities, are moving to digital payments. We're seeing more and more digital payment systems in cities to pay licenses and fines and fees and taxes. But if you look at it from a usability and accessibility perspective, can those mobile and online payments be used by someone with a cognitive disability? Do they time out too quickly for people to be able to use them effectively? Our kiosks, which are often used in transportation and in other areas for payments, is the location of the screen and the keyboard in the space around them. Does it work for people with mobility disabilities? So there are ways to look at these critical services, not only from the perspective of how exciting it is to be supporting the services with technology, but do they, in the deployment of these technologies in the services, are they working for everyone? Another one that I'd like to point out, because again, it's a trend that we see in a lot of cities, and that's around citizen engagement. A real core principle of smart cities is does the city make attempts to really engage its citizens and communities using technology in effective in new ways? So we're seeing more and more cities moving to digital, what we in the US call a digital 311 system. So systems that allow you to report problems, a pothole or a street light that's not working, and report them to the city, to the right department, and it gets fixed. Hopefully it gets fixed soon. There are also systems where cities can deploy information out to citizens and communities in their cities. Critically important, and again, these systems can be designed to be accessible and deployed in accessible ways, but they aren't always. And we've worked with multiple cities. I won't give you the city names, but I know in one very large city in the Americas, a true smart city, they were incredibly proud of their new digital 311 system, their citizen engagement system that was a mobile app and also available online, but it was completely inaccessible. And so they are now having to think about, how do we go back and retrofit this in a way, after having spent years and a lot of money developing it, so that it works for people with disabilities. Another city, a large city here in the US that we've worked with, has from the outset started thinking about their new digital 311 system to make sure that it actually did work for the broad range of disabilities. So how are we doing today? And when it comes to cities being both smarter and more inclusive? Over the course of our Smart Cities for All initiative, G3ICT's done some pretty unique and I think important survey and analysis work. Early on in the project, we actually surveyed more than 250 experts around the world on smart cities and inclusion and accessibility, and found from those experts that 60% of them thought that today smart cities are failing people with disabilities, that they're actually making the digital divide worse, not better, by deploying these technologies without thinking about accessibility. Very few of these experts could point to a smart city that was using the robust global ICT accessibility standards, just 18%. Likewise, we, as a follow-up to that survey and analysis, we were seeing a lot of cities working with their what's called their urban innovation ecosystems, incubators, research departments, accelerators in their cities that are creating new technology solutions. What we were seeing is that many of them were not accessible. These great, exciting new technology solutions coming out of these innovation ecosystems. And so we surveyed more than 150 entrepreneurs and startups in incubators around the world, and found that very few of them really understood if their exciting new smart solutions and technology solutions were accessible. Just a third of the global entrepreneurs surveyed or fully a third of the entrepreneurs that we surveyed were completely unsure if people with disabilities could use their solutions. And less than half had a strong understanding of accessibility and inclusion in their own product development and user experience design process. So there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done when it comes to affecting the innovation process so that it leads to, from the beginning, new technology solutions that are accessible. So with that, I wanted to touch on some of the pillars that and how we define what an inclusive smart city is, and then talk about some of the solutions. When we talk about and when we think about smart cities that are inclusive, we look at it across 5 categories of variables, or 5 pillars. The city's strategic intent. Does the city have a digital inclusion strategy? Does the city, does that digital inclusion strategy specifically reference people with disabilities? Is it that strategy, is it related to other important city strategies like its transportation strategy or its economic development strategy? Does the city have a business case for its commitment to accessibility and inclusion? Or does the city really just look at accessibility and inclusion of people with disabilities from a legal compliance perspective in doing the bare minimum? How does the city leverage both budget and leadership to support its commitment, specifically its commitment to people with disabilities and inclusion as part of being a smart city? Another category of variables that we look at when we're defining what an inclusive smart city is the city's culture. Does it have a culture of innovation? Every smart city has a culture of innovation, but an inclusive smart city should have a culture of innovation that looks at innovating new products and solutions that support people with disabilities. Are the city's engagement channels, both mainstream but also maybe newer engagement channels, are they accessible? And are they gathering information about accessibility in the city? Does the city have a commitment in the culture of diversity? Is it hiring people with disabilities? Is it training its staff about disability and accessibility? And transparency. Does the city make available information about how accessible it is today? We also look at the city's processes, its organizational structure. Is there a department or a named specific manager who's responsible for people with disabilities and accessibility? Is the city buying accessible technology, and how? Does the city have metrics, measurement around how accessible the city is so that it can improve on those metrics over time? And how is the city partnering with civil society and with industry, with technology vendors, on making the city more inclusive and accessible as it deploys technology? And then finally, the 2 last pillars or categories of variables that we look at are technology and data. Does the city evaluate its own technology deployments and assets? When it finds a problem of accessibility with technology that it's deployed, how does it fix it? Is the city using global standards? Is the city promoting the use of technology to solve long-standing urban accessibility challenges? One of the ones that I hear the most from disability commissioners in cities around the world is that they can't get a handle on the accessibility of their streets and sidewalks. But you can actually use technology and data to get a better handle on that. And some cities like New York City are doing that. And how's the city impacting the digital divide and the data divide as well? How is it providing training around and skilling around the use of technology for people with disabilities? Then finally, I'd like to talk about our Smart Cities for All toolkit. You can find this on our website. Over the last several years, we've developed tools that are being used by cities around the world and that we are using with cities. The tools are available in 11 languages. And just briefly, I'll touch on them. There's a guide to priority standards. This is a guide for CIOs of cities and IT departments that help them understand what are the 3 most important ICT accessibility standards that they should know about and be using, and how to use them importantly. There's a guide to adopting a procurement policy, so to help cities make sure that as they are investing in technology and buying technology and deploying technology, that it is accessible to people with disabilities. There's a guide to communicating the case for a commitment to inclusion and accessibility in the city that tells not just the human rights case for inclusion and accessibility, but also what's the business case, what's the technology case? What are all the reasons that we as a city should be investing in accessibility and inclusion? There's a database of solutions, which is not public yet because we're still developing that. But basically, right now, a database of 1,000 mainstream smart solutions and looking at how accessible are those today. Many of them are not. We recently launched an inclusive innovation playbook, which is a set of tasks and steps that cities can take to make sure that the incubators and accelerators that they work with, that often that they invest in, are creating accessible solutions. So things like mentoring around disability and accessibility for the entrepreneurs and startups. And then the final tool is built on that definition, that set of 5 pillars and variables. It's an assessment tool. Using that definition of what an inclusive smart city is, we're able to work with our partners to do assessments of cities and let them know today, based on these 27 variables, this is where your city is doing well and not doing well. And importantly, how do you improve on that? So with that, I invite you to go to the smartcitiesforall.org or g3ict.org and access some of these resources. And Hannes, I'll pause here for questions.
Thank you for a brilliant presentation, James. It's really like looking back on how fast the deployment of technology cities really try to innovate on, as you said, not only how they manage cities and how they govern their cities, but also really in the long run, how it actually affects our lives in our daily life, getting to work, working, etc., and moving around, orientate ourselves in the cities, depending on, of course, our different levels of mobility and how easy it is, and how really smart cities concept and the deployment of smart city technologies can really impact that, both in a positive way, but of course, looking back, also in a negative way, so as to assure that accessibility is really seen as a core component in any smart city tech intervention. Yeah, so for me, I think I will open up for more questions from the participants, and maybe I will pose 1 or 2 questions later, but please feel free to ask some questions.
Okay, hello, Hannes. This is Rachel. It looks like we did have a few questions come in. The first one is to James, and they asked, are you working with UN Habitat and other UN agencies to present your excellent toolkit?
A great question, and one that I love to talk about. Yes, we do partner with many, and have for 14 years at G3ict, with many different agencies at the UN. I mentioned that we were actually, while we're an independent nonprofit, we were created with support of the UN system. The chair of our board actually is Ambassador Luis Gallegos, who's considered to be the father of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And we do have, we're actually in discussions now with an even closer partnership with UN Habitat and their team, recognizing the launch of their new strategy just recently. We also work with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So as they're reviewing countries who have signed on and ratified the UN Convention, we've partnered with the Office of the High Commissioner and the CRPD committee to give them the kinds of questions they should be asking about related to technology and accessibility, where we work with the ITU on standards. We've worked with many different UN agencies, and we're excited about strengthening our partnership with UN Habitat in particular.
Okay, thank you, James. We did have another question in the Q&A, looking for suggestions on how to influence smart city agenda of national governments.
Another great question. One of the reasons we actually launched the Smart Cities for All initiative is because we were seeing governments in countries around the world that were investing, national governments that were investing in developing smart cities in their countries. And the one that I often point to is Shivani, where you are in India, which has a 100 smart cities initiative. They also have an Accessible India campaign as well. And we were, at the time, this was 4 years ago, thinking that in countries like that, and other countries have similar smart cities programs and accessibility programs, but wouldn't it be great if the objectives were somehow merged, so that as we're investing in 100 smart cities in India or in Brazil or wherever, that we're thinking about accessibility. So we absolutely need to be partnering not only with the cities and giving them the tools and the strategies to improve, but recognizing that national governments need to play a role as well. And one of the things that we've started doing exactly to that point, and again, it's a great question, is as we start working with cities and countries, can we work with groups of cities? So late last year, I was in Kenya for work with the national government there. They've actually convened their 5 largest cities to work together on becoming smarter. And it asked me to start talking with them about, as these 5 biggest cities in Kenya are working to become smarter, use more technology, use more data, this is how you can also be thinking about being more inclusive. And so there absolutely is a role for both cities and national level governments to support this kind of progress.
Okay, thank you, James. We have another question about the toolkit. It's already translated into many languages. Are any further languages planned?
Right now, no, although it's a great point, and I'm not sure who's asking that question, or if there's a specific language that they're looking for. Please let me know after the fact or whatever. I'd be curious to hear that. The 11 languages that we picked initially were languages in countries, in geographies where we knew there was a strong interest in activity on smart cities. And so you'll see 2 languages from India, Hindi and Marathi. You'll see Arabic for sure, because there's a lot of activity on smart cities in that in the Middle East region. There's Japanese and Korean. So the Portuguese, primarily, frankly, for Brazil, and the focus on smart cities in Brazil. So that was our initial strategy, is to sort of think about where do we see a lot of interest and activity on smart cities, and let's make sure we get these tools in those languages. But would love to hear ideas on additional languages.
Okay, great. And Laura, if you'd like to leave in the chat what language you were interested in, I'll make sure to forward that on to James. I do have one other question that came in. Some cities are responsible to develop an accessibility plan to implement accessibility across physical, digital environment, and transport. Are there examples of good practices where cities have successfully implemented digital accessibility, including monitoring, implementation of standards, and engaging with persons with disabilities in the process?
So, the short answer is no. I mean, there are a lot of cities are doing a lot of good things, and a lot of cities have plans and pieces of plans. I don't know of yet, although if this person actually knows of some examples, or if anyone knows of examples of comprehensive digital accessibility plans in cities, would love to see it. From our experience with cities and working with them, they've been more piecemeal. One of the things that we try to drive with our assessment tool and the roadmap for improvement that comes out of those assessments is coordinate that across city departments, that approach to accessibility and inclusion, that commitment, make sure that it's not siloed in one department, but that it is a comprehensive, high-level digital inclusion strategy. And so we're constantly pulling in good practices. And one of the things that, as a next step with Smart Cities for All, that we're interested in doing is creating a community practice of cities. We've actually had a lot of cities approach us to say, we want to know what are the good and bad practices, frankly, the problems that other cities have faced, so that we can learn from them. And sharing these kinds of existing resources that we are always collecting is one of the roles for a global cities community practice.
Okay, thank you again, James. And I did respond to one question privately, but I will just, it might be on everybody's minds. We will make a copy of this presentation available, and we are also recording the webinar today. And I will send that out by the end of the day tomorrow. We'll get everything out to all the attendees and registrants today. Let's see.
Rachel, when you send that out, can you also send out my my email address, just in case there are any follow-on questions? I'm not sure if I left that.
Of course. Let's see. We had a question about the toolkit in Indian regional language, Kannada. So I will add that to the list if we get any other requests for languages.
So on that, there's a lot of languages and dialects in India, which we recognize. We started with Hindi and Marathi, which I think are two of the ones, and obviously English as well, which are used pretty broadly. I will say that in India, I'm really excited that just recently, G3ICT signed a memorandum of understanding, a cooperation agreement with the Indian National Institute of Urban Affairs. And so we really are starting to look at ways that we can partner together to support cities, smart cities, being more inclusive in India.
Okay. Then we're talking about India. We'll continue. What kind of help can we get to make India a smart city?
I mentioned that India was one of the reasons that sort of drove us to think about launching this sort of Smart Cities for All initiative. And we've actually done some work, and I've done some work, a little bit of work with a couple of the 100 smart cities in India, and had obviously some conversations, and we have a new agreement with the government of India. I think for any city, not just in India, one of the things that I would point you to first is that procurement tool. We know from experience with the US federal government, with governments in Europe, for example, Australia and elsewhere, that when a government says that they will only buy accessible technology, it has a huge impact in a lot of ways in terms of employment of people with disabilities, in driving industry to focus on accessibility in their technology solutions. And cities in India, especially through this Smart Cities initiative, are investing a lot in technology and technology services. So I would really push for Indian cities in particular to make sure that every RFP or tender that goes out for technology has a very short clause that says it must be accessible and meet this ICT accessibility standard. Both of those tools are in our toolkit.
Okay, thank you again, James. And another question, which private sector organizations globally are you working with concerning digital aspects?
So we work with a lot of different companies, big and small, in a variety of ways. For our Smart Cities for All initiative, I mentioned two of our sort of core partners from the outset who had a vision that this was, like we did, as well as our partners like World Enabled, that this was something that needed to happen, were Microsoft and AT&T, both of whom are very strong themselves as companies in terms of their commitment to accessibility, but also have a vision of partnering with civil society organizations like ours to really drive that. But there are a lot of technology companies, financial services companies as well that are doing good things. I can list off many of which we partner with on varying levels, big and small. So smaller companies, I mentioned the company Move It. It's still a relatively small company if you look at FTE, number of employees, but has a big customer base. We actually did some work with Move It with the city of Guadalajara in Mexico, which is the second largest city there and probably their smartest city in terms of using technology and data. And we saw how Move It, using their very unique data that they have from people moving around the city of Guadalajara, were actually almost immediately able to give the transportation department there some good insights to, if you're going to be one by one making your public transportation stops, stations accessible, consider how people are actually moving around the city. And Move It actually has that kind of data of how people move around the city, which really helps the city think more smartly about, you can't invest in making every transportation station accessible all at once. So how do you do it in a way that actually matches with real transportation flows? And so even small companies like Move It, which is a fast growing company, have great resources and expertise and want to be working with us and with cities in deploying that.
Okay, thank you, Ken. We do have, I know we're a little bit over our time. We do have a few more questions scrolling in here. The other one comes from CBM Haiti. Do you have any concerns if CEOs refuse to look at the disability market in balancing the cost of production versus the benefits margin?
So kind of related to the previous question, yes, absolutely is the short answer. One of the ways that we sort of evaluate which companies we partner with are, do they have a commitment and an understanding to accessibility themselves? And the leading companies, regardless of the sector, the technology sector, the financial services sector, both of which are critical to smart cities, they understand and have a commitment to accessibility. And it could be for corporate social responsibility reasons, which is great. But even more impactful, I think, is when the company realizes that it makes good business sense for that company to care about the accessibility of its products and services. And many do. And so we do a lot of work with governments, but we also do a lot of work with companies to help them to think about the accessibility of their own products and services. So yes, we would have a concern, but I think the good news is that a large number of companies, big and small, in different sectors, have this understanding and commitment already, and more will come.
Thank you, James. Moving along, we have a question from the chat asking the rights of persons with disabilities is an important dimension of the inclusivity of smart cities. However, there are also other dimensions such as gender equality, refugees, older persons, etc. Do you have plans to collaborate with other organizations to develop toolkits into a well-rounded tool for smart city development?
Great question. We don't have specific plans. We're very open to that. I think we've been pretty focused on inserting a focus on accessibility and people with disabilities into the work of cities and more broadly as well. But we're absolutely open to that. And if that person has suggestions, please email me or leave a note in the chat box. I'd love to follow up on that.
Okay. And let's see, with nearly 70% of population still residing in villages in countries like India, should we make it a smart village agenda instead? What would be the vision in this case?
Sure. We've actually had these conversations with governments, national governments, who are as interested in their smaller cities and their more rural areas as well. That makes complete sense. And I think the discussions that we've had is that some of these strategies, some of these good practices make sense in smaller cities and even in rural areas. I think in some countries, or in many countries, I would say that as you get out of urban areas, there are some other issues that need to be front of mind, like just basic connectivity, for example, and how do you deploy broadband? A lot of these digital solutions don't work necessarily if there isn't good connectivity. And so that becomes a part of the conversation, but we're certainly open to and have done some work on, we certainly do work with smaller cities. By design, we make that a point of our work, and not just large cities, but also smaller cities. And more rural or smaller villages even need to be a part of this conversation and the solutions as well.
Okay, thank you, James. We have one final question, and we'll make this our final question for the day. Anything else? I will include James' email when we send out the presentation and the recording, and we can follow up that way. But so this last question is, we are having a lot of smart city projects in India in which inclusiveness is of nowhere in the picture. What do you suggest for disability organizations and individuals?
Fantastic question. And one of the things that I didn't mention in my introduction to G3ICT is one of the reasons why I was excited to join G3ICT. I've been working on ICT accessibility for 15 years or so, primarily initially from the technology industry, but joined G3ICT 4 or 5 years ago because I really admired, I had worked with them, but admired their approach to working with countries and with cities was sort of a three-pronged approach, that when you're going in to advise a government or that you need to have the government there as part of the conversation. We think that you also need to have the technology industry there because they are literally providing the solutions to inclusion, digital inclusion, but absolutely civil society, disabled persons organizations need to be a part of it. And so we always make a point of bringing in civil society organizations. When we do assessments of cities, one of the seats that we reserve on the expert team for assessors is from a local, ideally disability organization, so that they can bring that perspective into the conversation about how that city should be improving. So there in India, I mentioned that we have a new agreement with the National Institute of Urban Affairs. Again, if that person wants to reach out to me separately, we've already started with the government in India, the Institute, talking about how do we engage civil society. And so I'd love to pull interested people there in India into that conversation.
Okay, thank you, James. And I will let Hannes say any closing remarks. We would just like to thank the World Blind Union for putting together today's webinar, and our presenters, James and Federico and Shivani, and thank you to AI Captioning for providing the captioning today. So we will get this presentation out to everyone by tomorrow, and I will turn it over to Hannes for any closing remarks.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, from the side of World Blind Union, of course, we are very excited, but also very happy that we could pull this off together with our partners. And on behalf of the World Blind Union, E3ICT Smart Cities for All, and the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, as well as United Cities and Local Governments, we would like to extend our gratitude and thanks for you who made it today. But we also like to remind you that we will also host a webinar already tomorrow, focusing on how organizations and individuals can create and evaluate accessible documents. Because we know that creating accessible documents is about enabling everyone to access information on the same basis as others. And this is a key issue for everyone to become more inclusive in the everyday work. We have always to start somewhere, and that's also very much on communication. So from the side of the World Blind Union, I'm happy to meet you tomorrow as well, to really also, of course, going to a very specific issue, but we always have to start where we are in our everyday practice. So by those words, I once again like to thank you so much for attending today and pose very relevant and important questions on how we can make cities and urban settlements more accessible and inclusive for everyone. So thank you so much for joining.
All right, thank you again. And hopefully we'll see many of you back tomorrow.